My mom admitted she never wanted me. My dad said I was ruining their lives, so I ran away and found out something awful. I suppose it all began on the day I was born, or perhaps even earlier. As I grew up, I always sensed that I was the misfit, the unintended consequence that everyone secretly wished had never occurred. My parents, Mary and Greg, were just teenagers, freshly graduated from high school. From the hushed tones and side glances, it was clear I wasn't part of their original plans. They married because of my unexpected arrival, and their regret became palpable over time. My childhood memories are scant when it comes to warmth or affection. Instead, I recall my mother's icy glares and my father's frequent absences more vividly. Being a truck driver, he spent most of his days on long roads, and I often speculated if he took on extra trips just to avoid returning home. On the rare occasions he was present, he seemed to view me more as a life-altering burden than a son. His frustration would often erupt, manifesting in thrown objects and loud arguments with my mother. Where he berated her lack of foresight, I felt like an apparition in my own home, visible only when there was blame to be assigned. At school, this sense of exclusion extended into my educational experiences. It was as though the teachers were privy to some secret, treating me as the unwanted child they all expected me to be. Mrs. Thompson, my first grade teacher, was particularly harsh, always managing to single me out as the least capable student. No effort of mine seemed sufficient to change her harsh perceptions. Frequently, the last one called upon, her responses to my participation were often marked by an exaggerated roll of her eyes and a dismissive sigh, accompanied by comments about my slowness. This treatment didn't go unnoticed by my classmates. They mimicked her disdain, targeting me for ridicule and exclusion. By the third grade, I had become an outcast. Behind my back, and sometimes openly, they branded me the mistake. They would scatter my books, trip me in the corridors, and spread cruel rumors about my parental acceptance, or the lack thereof. I vividly recall an incident during recess when Tyler, the notorious class bully, and his cronies cornered me behind the school. Tyler was larger than most kids his age, with a mean streak that seemed ingrained in his very core. He cornered me against a cold, unforgiving brick wall, his breath fetid and close enough to make me flinch. His words were cruel and clear. I should vanish, he said, because no one would miss me if I disappeared. But it wasn't just his words that terrified me. It was what he did next that has haunted me ever since. With a sinister grin, Tyler produced a lighter he'd swiped from his older brother. He flicked it to life, the small flame dancing menacingly close to my face. Paralyzed with fear, I could only muster a weak plea for them to stop. Ignoring my pleas, Tyler, with a laugh that chilled my blood, pressed the flame against my arm. The pain was immediate and excruciating, burning through my flesh while I screamed in agony. The boys dashed off, their laughter echoing behind them, leaving me alone to nurse a burn so severe I knew I had to conceal it. When I returned home, I lied to my mother, claiming I'd brushed against a hot stove. She didn't even glance away from her magazine to acknowledge my pain. As the years passed, the hostility from my peers only intensified. By middle school, the bullying became so severe that each morning was filled with dread. My presence seemed invisible to most teachers except when they opted to participate in the mockery. Mr. Davis, my math teacher, particularly relished humiliating me. He'd often call on me to tackle the most difficult problems, reveling in my inevitable mistakes. With each wrong answer, he would theatrically laugh, declaring that perhaps math wasn't for everyone, prompting laughter from the class that felt like daggers each time. I would shrink into my seat, wishing for invisibility. Yet, the worst was still to come, a moment so crushing it made me doubt my will to continue. On the last day of 8th grade, a day meant for celebration with no classes, just games and activities, I hoped to simply blend in. But Tyler and his cronies had different plans. During a water balloon fight, they singled me out as their target, ensuring my day of relief was anything but peaceful. Initially, it was merely water balloons, but soon they escalated to filling them with mud, paint, and anything else they could scavenge. By the time they finished, I was drenched in grime, a spectacle that sent them into fits of laughter. Humiliated and fighting back tears, I retreated to the bathroom to clean up, but the torment was far from over. Later, as school let out, Tyler and his cronies ambushed me once more, their backpacks bulging with unidentifiable contents. They dragged me to a secluded area behind the school and began to unload their bags. Rotten eggs, spoiled milk, and other revolting items collected specifically for this cruel finale. As they pelted me with their disgusting arsenal, their laughter rang in my ears while I choked on the stench that threatened to make me sick. But the true horror came when Tyler produced a pair of scissors. Initially, I was confused, but panic set in as he yanked my head back by my hair, revealing his sinister intention. He ruthlessly snipped away, leaving jagged, uneven patches as I struggled in vain. His friends pinned me down, ensuring I could do little but endure the humiliation. When they finally ceased, they flung the severed locks at my face before scattering, leaving me in a heap, sobbing. Arriving home in disarray, my mother's response was a resigned sigh. "What did you do now?" she asked, implying the blame was mine. Exhausted and defeated, I didn't even attempt to explain. I just retreated to my room, locked the door, and wept until sleep overtook me. High school brought no respite as the bullying evolved into a more psychological torment. As my parents' indifference deepened, their affection and attention were lavished upon my two younger siblings, their real children. In their eyes, I remained the accident, merely tolerated while my brother and sister were celebrated, receiving the love, attention, and support that were never afforded to me. It felt as though I had become invisible, nothing more than a specter drifting through the corners of our home. One distressing night, after a particularly harsh day at school, I accidentally eavesdropped on a conversation between my parents in the kitchen. My father, deep into his cups, slurred his words grievously while my mother attempted to shush him, but I caught every bitter word. "I wish we never had him," my father muttered, his voice steeped in regret. "Our lives would have been so much better without that damn mistake." My mother, perhaps too weary to argue, simply exhaled a heavy sigh and resignedly replied, "It is what it is, Greg. We're stuck with him." Those words, acknowledging their stuck reality with me as much as mine with them, sliced through me more painfully than any physical wound. I felt as though I was suffocating, ensnared in a life from which escape seemed impossible. Thoughts of ending my misery surfaced more frequently than I cared to admit. Yet, a fragile thread of hope that someone might notice me, that things might improve, kept me from despairing completely. Over time, however, that slender hope faded under the weight of relentless abuse, neglect, and the perpetual reminder that I was undesired. I began to skip school, wandering aimlessly around town to delay my return home. When I did return, I secluded myself in my room, staying awake through the night to avoid any interaction with my parents. One Saturday evening, while my parents were out, I was left in charge of my younger siblings who, unlike everyone else, didn't see me as a burden. We were watching a movie when the phone rang. It was one of my father's friends calling with the shocking news that my parents had been in a car accident and were now hospitalized in critical condition. Hanging up the phone, I was overwhelmed by a tumult of emotions, fear and sorrow naturally, but also an unsettling sense of relief. For a fleeting moment, I entertained the thought that their absence might liberate me from the endless cycle of torment. Yet, I knew such relief was temporary, shadowed by the reality of what their conditions meant. My parents survived the accident, but both were severely injured. When they returned home from the hospital, our domestic situation deteriorated further. My father's bitterness intensified. He became angrier, often unleashing his frustrations on me. My mother, grappling with chronic pain, withdrew into herself, leaving me to shoulder the responsibility of caring for my siblings alone. During this period, I began to unravel. The relentless stress, the unending cycle of abuse and neglect gradually eroded my spirit. I lost interest in school, in my future, in everything. Each day was about survival, clinging to a faint hope for change. The decision to run away was not made on a whim. The car accident marked a turning point. I realized that staying would mean perpetual entrapment in a life of misery, a life that had suffocated me since I could remember. I yearned for freedom, for a chance to breathe, to live without the constant shadow of pain and neglect. I meticulously planned my escape over months, scraping together every penny from odd jobs and quietly saving any money I could discreetly take. It wasn't much, but it was enough to set the wheels in motion. Choosing a destination was the most challenging part. I longed for a place distant enough to sever old ties, where no one knew my name and I could start anew. After thorough research, I settled on a city several states away, a place large enough to disappear into, yet brimming with opportunities for those ready to toil. It seemed ideal. On the night of my departure, I left without farewells, waiting until the deep silence of sleep enveloped the house. I packed my few belongings into a backpack and quietly exited through the front door. Pausing on the porch, I cast a final glance at the house, pondering if our paths would ever cross again. Yet, there was nothing for me there. No love, no reason to stay. With that, I turned away and vanished into the darkness, hopping from one bus to another, using the small stash of cash to propel me forward until I reached the city that promised a new beginning. With no friends, no family, and just a handful of dollars, I found myself in a new city, feeling a sense of freedom I had never known before. The urban sprawl was initially overwhelming, crowded with people and buzzing with noise, yet it was thrilling. Here, I had the chance to redefine myself. No one knew of my troubled past or the pain I had endured. Starting over as a blank slate, the possibilities before me seemed limitless. Those first few weeks were grueling. I alternated between shelters and the streets for sleep while I tirelessly searched for employment. Despite the challenges, returning to my old life was not an option. I spent my days filling out job applications across the city, determined to secure a stable foothold. My persistence paid off when a small diner on the city's outskirts needed a dishwasher. The job was modest, but it was a start, providing me just enough to escape street life. The work was demanding and the pay minimal, barely covering rent for a tiny room I found. However, I valued the independence it brought. I was earning my way, detached from the past torments. Keeping to myself, I focused on my responsibilities, and gradually my situation improved. I progressed from washing dishes to bussing and then waiting tables, where I discovered an unexpected proficiency. The tips were decent, and I began saving with a newfound purpose to build a life that would defy the disparaging labels my parents had imposed on me. As time passed, the city felt more like home. I formed friendships with others who had their own tales of escape and renewal. These connections fostered a sense of belonging, a community where I wasn't an outsider. This newfound support network strengthened my resolve. The turning point came when a burgeoning restaurant downtown offered me a job. This opportunity represented a significant upgrade from the diner, a more prestigious venue with better pay and greater prospects for advancement. Seizing the opportunity, I dedicated myself wholeheartedly to my new role, working tirelessly to demonstrate my worth. The owner, Lisa, a discerning yet equitable woman, recognized my potential and mentored me. Under her tutelage, I absorbed every facet of the restaurant industry, driven by a voracious appetite for learning. With Lisa's guidance, my career trajectory soared. I advanced from waiting tables to managing the front of the house, and eventually, I took charge of the entire restaurant operation. My efforts translated into substantial earnings, allowing me to rent a decent apartment. For the first time, I felt a true sense of autonomy over my future. The restaurant became not just my workplace, but my fervent passion. I invested my entire being into its success, and my efforts bore fruit. However, despite my professional accomplishments, the specter of my past lingered. Occasionally, my thoughts would drift to my family, wondering how they fared since my departure. Although I knew they had never shown concern for me, a part of me remained tethered to them. I refrained from direct contact, yet I sometimes gleaned updates through mutual acquaintances, ensuring they were still surviving. One such update revealed a grim reality back home. My father, unable to secure stable employment post-accident, had sunk deeper into bitterness and wrath. My mother had succumbed to a profound depression, neglecting her duties towards my younger siblings who were left to scrape by in a deteriorating household. This news stirred a complex blend of emotions within me: relief at my escape, guilt for abandoning them, and a perverse satisfaction in witnessing them contend with the repercussions of their neglect. Nevertheless, I resolved to concentrate on my own path and achievements. I had invested too much in building my life to allow the shadows of my past to drag me backward. Then, unexpectedly, a call from my father shattered the calm. Hearing his voice after so many years sent a shiver through me. He offered no greetings, no apologies, merely resuming contact as if nothing had changed. He bluntly stated they were struggling financially and demanded that I support them, claiming it was time for me to man up and contribute. I was astounded by his nerve. After all the neglect and torment he had inflicted, He now had the audacity to ask for my help, yet what truly stunned me was the fury that surged within me upon hearing his demand. I had believed I had moved past these feelings, but his voice and his entitled demands reopened old wounds. I firmly told him no, declaring I owed him nothing and that any troubles he faced were of his own making. That's when he lost control. He erupted into a tirade, hurling insults and labeling me ungrateful, selfish, and a failure. He blamed me for their financial woes, my mother's depression, and his personal failures. He accused me of abandoning the family, leaving them in misery while I thrived in the city. His words were laced with the same venom I had endured throughout my childhood, and suddenly I felt as powerless as I had as a boy. However, I was no longer that helpless child. I was an adult with my own life. I told him to go to hell, affirming that I was done with him and all of them. I hung up, my body trembling with rage. Days later, my father unexpectedly appeared at my apartment. I don't know how he found me, but there he was, pounding on my door, demanding entry. I initially refused to open it, but he was relentless, threatening to force his way in. The fear of what he might do paralyzed me, yet I knew I couldn't allow him to pull me back into that nightmare. Finally, I opened the door, hoping to defuse the situation and persuade him to leave. However, the moment he saw me, the fury in his eyes was unmistakable. There was no talking him down. He lunged at me, fists ready, and we clashed right in the doorway. He was larger and stronger, and for a moment I feared for my life. But then, driven by a surge of self-preservation, I fought back with all the strength I could muster. I pushed him back forcefully, striking him with all my might until he staggered backward, his breathing heavy and ragged, blood trickling down his face. Standing there, my chest heaving with adrenaline, I confronted the depth of my hatred for him. I despised him for the anguish he had caused, for his cruel treatment, and for his attempts to shatter the life I had painstakingly rebuilt. My loathing deepened as he stood there, his eyes a tumultuous mix of anger and disbelief. For a moment, I braced for another attack, but instead he turned and walked away, leaving me trembling in the doorway, overwhelmed by both rage and relief. After that confrontation, I heard nothing from him for some time. I tried to refocus on my work and the life I had crafted for myself, but moving past that violent encounter proved difficult. The old scars had been reopened, leading me to seek solace in alcohol, which only compounded my struggles. My performance at work began to falter, and for the first time since leaving home, I felt my grasp on control slipping. Then unexpectedly, I received a call from a hospital back home. My father had been involved in another truck accident, this one severe. He was in critical condition and his survival was uncertain. The hospital inquired if I would come if I could stand by him. I was torn. Part of me yearned to confront him one final time, yet another part resisted any engagement with the man who had inflicted so much pain upon me. Ultimately, I chose not to go, telling myself he was reaping the consequences of his own actions and that I owed him nothing. A few days later, another call came. My father had succumbed to his injuries, the accident had been devastating, and he hadn't survived. When asked if I wanted to handle the funeral arrangements, I declined. My decision was firm. I would not tether myself further to the man who had caused me endless suffering. I instructed them to contact my mother for the funeral arrangements. I just couldn't bring myself to care. Yet, that wasn't entirely accurate. In a sense, I did care. His death symbolized the definitive end of that painful chapter in my life. There was no possibility of reconciliation or further harm. The constant looming threat that had overshadowed my existence was finally gone. For the first time ever, I truly felt free. But this freedom was a profound and somewhat daunting reality. I chose not to attend the funeral, nor did I inquire about its details. Instead, I remained in the city, immersing myself in my work, in an attempt to escape the memories that persisted in the shadows of my mind, haunting my dreams. I recognized the need to confront these lingering shadows, to find a way to move beyond the past, but the path forward was unclear. Gradually, as I reduced my drinking and began therapy, I started to rediscover my sense of self. It became apparent that my mourning was not just for my father, but for the lost innocence of my childhood, for the familial bonds that never formed, and for everything that had been unjustly taken from me. Over time, healing turned into progress. I continued to dedicate myself to crafting the life I had always envisioned. Eventually, I reached a place of tranquility, not without difficulty. as memories still surfaced unexpectedly, but I learned to coexist with them. I embraced the realization that my past did not have to dictate my future. I could forge my own path and define my own worth beyond the misconceptions my parents had imposed upon me. After years of diligent work, learning every facet of the restaurant industry and saving every possible penny, I was ready to realize my ultimate dream. It was time to establish my own restaurant, a place that would embody my resilience and achievements. I located the ideal spot in a vibrant area of the city, an old building brimming with character yet requiring significant renovation. The task was formidable. Transforming this space into my vision was daunting, but my drive and the dreams I harbored fueled my determination. I envisioned a space that radiated warmth and welcome, a stark departure from the cold, oppressive backdrop of my childhood. The renovation process was demanding yet rewarding. I collaborated closely with Olivia, a dynamic designer who grasped my vision with impeccable clarity. Together, we meticulously planned every aspect, from the color palette to the layout, the ambient lighting, and the artwork that would adorn the walls. My aim was for the restaurant to mirror my own saga, my persistence, my passion for gastronomy, and the triumphs over my past adversities. Olivia was instrumental in making this vision tangible, and gradually the once vacant building morphed into a place of beauty. The anticipation building up to the opening day was intense. I had extended invitations to friends, peers from the industry, and local gastronomy critics, all in hopes of making a memorable first impression. The night before, the excitement rendered me almost sleepless as I obsessed over every detail, fearful of any mishap. However, the launch day surpassed my expectations, seeing the restaurant brimming with patrons who relished the cuisine and the ambiance I had crafted affirmed that every effort was worthwhile. The initial weeks buzzed with activity exceeding my projections. The influx of glowing reviews and the patrons' appreciation for the culinary experience and the story behind the restaurant cemented its status as a new city favorite. For the first time, I experienced a profound sense of pride and fulfillment. I had created something significant from scratch, a successful venture that was entirely mine. One evening, after wrapping up another thriving day, an unexpected call disrupted the calm. It was from an unknown number, my mother. Her voice was frail and desperate as she explained her dire financial straits and pleaded for financial help. Years had passed since our last contact, and I had naively believed I was free from the toxicity of our past relationship. Yet here she was, not with apologies or overtures of reconciliation, but seeking financial aid. The resurgence of old resentments and bitterness I thought I had surmounted began to stir within me once again. I firmly told her no. I explained that after all the hardships she and my father had inflicted upon me, I owed her nothing. Her reaction was visceral. She began to cry, her voice escalating to screams over the phone, accusing me of being heartless and of abandoning her as I had the rest of our family. Then her desperation took a darker turn as she threatened to end her life if I didn't assist her. The shock of her threat was palpable. I knew she could be manipulative, but this was a drastic new level. The possibility that she might follow through was terrifying, yet I couldn't allow myself to be manipulated by her threats. I told her she needed genuine help, not the kind that I could provide, and that I would no longer be swayed by her manipulations. A few days later, during a bustling lunch service at my restaurant, a server approached me with news that a woman was waiting at the bar. It was her. She appeared older, more haggard, and her eyes had a wild, almost frenzied quality. To avoid any disruption in front of my customers, I escorted her to a private office. Once the door shut, she launched into her pleas again, begging for money, claiming desperation and nowhere else to turn. Then her words took an unexpected turn. She declared that I was not her biological son. At first, I doubted what I had heard, but she repeated it, her voice quivering with emotion. She confessed that she had taken me in as an infant, fulfilling a promise to someone, and had kept this a secret all along. She admitted to resenting me because I wasn't truly hers, claiming she never wanted me but felt obligated to raise me. Her revelation left me reeling, trying to grasp the enormity of her words. How could I not be her son? Who was I, if not her child? In that moment, it felt as though the very foundation of my identity had crumbled away. As the initial shock ebbed away, a deep need for answers grew within me. I had to uncover the truth about my origins and the reason behind the secrecy that shrouded my early life. When I pressed my mother for the full story, she broke down again, insisting it was too complex and painful to explain. Determined to unearth the truth, I enlisted the help of a private investigator known for her efficacy, Karen. After sharing every fragment of information my mother had reluctantly given, I tasked Karen with delving into my past to discover my true identity. Karen's approach was methodical. She began with my birth records, which proved to be a puzzle in themselves. The documents placed my birth in a nearby town's hospital, but discrepancies and missing information soon emerged. There were odd notations and a conspicuous absence of evidence confirming my mother had given birth to me. Shifting her focus, Karen interviewed old neighbors, family friends, and anyone else who might have insights from the time of my adoption. The revelations were unsettling. It turned out many remembered my sudden arrival as a baby, yet no one knew my origins. Murmurs of a secretive agreement my mother had made floated around, yet these were mere speculations, shadowed in uncertainty. Karen persisted, sifting through every lead and rumor. After exhaustive investigation, she stumbled upon a significant clue: a woman named Sarah who had lived in our town around my birth and vanished mysteriously soon after. Digging deeper, Karen unearthed a police report involving Sarah in a domestic conflict with a man suspected of abuse. Crucially, the report noted that Sarah had given birth recently, but the whereabouts of the child were unknown. This lead suggested a potential connection to my mysterious past. This lead was the first tangible breakthrough we had achieved, and it propelled me to take decisive action. I resolved to file a lawsuit against my adoptive mother, demanding a paternity test and a thorough investigation into my origins. My goal was twofold: uncover the absolute truth and ensure she could no longer inflict any harm upon me. The legal proceedings were arduous. My mother retained a lawyer who portrayed me as ungrateful, unstable, and vindictive, suggesting that my lawsuit was merely an attempt to retaliate against her for past grievances. Yet, for me, this was about securing my autonomy and uncovering my true identity. The court mandated a paternity test, and the results definitively proved that I was not my mother's biological child. The courtroom rippled with the impact of this revelation, and I observed the shock and sense of betrayal etched across my mother's face as the truth was unveiled. For me, however, the result brought a profound sense of clarity and affirmation. I was not the mistake she had labeled me all these years. I was someone else entirely, with a different narrative and heritage. But this discovery only led to deeper inquiries. The court also initiated a formal investigation into my background, which unveiled truths more startling than anything I had anticipated. The investigator, Karen, had been correct. Sarah was indeed my biological mother. She had been a young, frightened woman escaping an abusive relationship. She gave birth to me in secrecy, and tragically, she died in an accident shortly thereafter. My adoptive mother, Mary, had not taken me in out of compassion or love, but as part of a nefarious arrangement with the man who had abused Sarah, my biological father. He was a violent, dangerous individual who had coerced Mary into taking me to conceal his crimes. He compensated her to raise me as her own and keep the sordid truth from surfacing. Consequently, Mary lived with overwhelming guilt and resentment, which she unjustly directed at me, unable to confront the real perpetrator of her anguish. The legal battle was protracted and strenuous, with my mother resisting every disclosure and challenge, but ultimately, the truth prevailed. The court ruled decisively in my favor, dissolving any legal bonds between us. At last, I was truly free, liberated from the deceit, from the burdensome past that had long shadowed me. I threw myself into my restaurant, channeling my energies into making it a resounding success. I found comfort in the routine of my work, in the community that supported me, and in the new life I had painstakingly constructed. I resumed therapy to navigate through the layers of trauma, anger, and sorrow. The journey was far from easy. There were days when the past seemed like an insurmountable burden, yet my resolve to advance remained firm. Gradually, a genuine sense of peace began to take root. I rekindled relationships with friends in the city, those who had become akin to family. I ventured to form new connections, learning to trust and welcome others into my life once more. It was challenging to break down the walls I had built around myself, but the effort proved invaluable. After years of isolation, encased in a cocoon of pain and loneliness, I was finally embracing openness. Allowing others in, I discovered joy and camaraderie in the world around me. One evening, as I surveyed the vibrant scene in my restaurant, the dining room alive with laughter, conversation, and patrons relishing the ambiance I had curated, I realized I had achieved what I had long sought, a sense of belonging. Standing there, amidst the warmth and mirth of my own creation, I acknowledged that I had crafted a life distinctly my own, untethered from the shadows that once loomed so large. I had found a place where I truly belonged, a life distinctly shaped by my own aspirations and healed by my own endeavors.